Most people with blood pressure are like, oh, I just got to watch my sodium. I got to keep my sodium down. Nobody feels worse than on a low sodium diet.
Oh, terrible.
My gosh.
Did it because I thought it was going to help my blood pressure.
And it didn't.
No, it doesn't.
I learned that stimulants, lack of sleep, unnecessary gain in body weight was the main driver in my blood pressure being elevated. There was an individual that had refeeding syndrome after a bodybuilding show. He ate diazides, he ate a ton of sugar, and drank a bunch of fluid. Next day, he couldn't stand up. He lost full function of his lower limbs. Went to the hospital. His potassium was super low, and his magnesium was almost not detectable in his blood.
Ew.
It was like bottom. Most people with blood pressure are like, oh, I just got to watch my sodium. I got to keep my sodium down, you know?
Mhm.
I got to do that. Or they just try to find a supplement they can take to help combat that, or maybe even medication. But at the end of the day, you know, it's maybe a multifactorial thing, but I learned that stimulants, lack of sleep, unnecessary gain in body weight was main driver in my blood pressure being elevated, even though I never really had an issue, but mine would go where most people's are, even though genetically mine are low.
Yeah.
So it's like, you know, when my sleep was well, managing stress, and I wasn't abusing stimulants, 1 cup of coffee, things were fine. And then sodium doesn't really do dick all unless you're just doing an absurd amount of sodium and you're just one of those unlucky bastards that, you know, genetically you're affected by sodium. But that was a big one.
So I have a formula for the amount of sodium and potassium an athlete should consume. And I got it from Broderick Chavez. You know who he is?
Yep.
Yeah. Evil genius. It's 2 milligrams of sodium per kilocalorie consumed and 1 milligram of potassium per kilocalorie consumed is kind of where you want to be with those minerals. So like, let's say you're on a 5,000 calorie diet, 10 grams of sodium a day, 5 grams of potassium. Potassium's easy to come by. Just make sure you have one meal that has potatoes in it. You know, eat a couple servings of spinach, probably get the rest through actually eating real meat, you know, and some other vegetables here and there. And sodium, you're probably going to have to add it to your food. And what I think a lot of guys find out when they start actually adding sodium to their food, if they haven't been doing that and they haven't been eating enough sodium, is their pumps are better in the gym. They have more energy.
Yeah.
You know,
Nobody feels worse than on a low sodium diet.
Oh, terrible.
My gosh. You ever done a low sodium diet?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I did it because I thought it was going to help my blood pressure.
And it didn't.
No, it doesn't. Instead, you feel, I don't know how to describe it. It's just, you just don't feel great.
I do. You feel foggy, a general malaise, kind of fatigue, and your muscles feel kind of empty and flat. I felt horrendous.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like you're insanely flat. It's not like you're insanely fatigued, but I felt foggy, just kind of out of it.
Yeah.
And then as soon as all of a sudden you're like, you know, I figured this out a long time ago before I was even bodybuilding. And like, I started eating very healthy for motocross and watching my sodium intake. And it's so important to me. And I'm like, dude, why am I performing worse? I'm eating healthier. What's the problem here? And then like, I go out and have a cheat meal and like, I retain water. And like the next day I'm like, I feel great. Like, what the hell? And then I'm like, what is it? And then like the next day I'm like, add a bunch of calories, see if that does it. I'm like, I still feel foggy.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, maybe it's got to be the sodium. Add more salt for a few days. And I was like, holy crap, I'm performing way better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does help. You know, actually, I got a question for you. This is kind of this is more of my personal interest, but some people overconsume sodium. There is a point where you can eat too much of it. If people are eating more processed foods, for example, and that shit's sodium, they just pack it full in there. You don't realize how much you're getting. So I do like to eat a lot of salt with my meals, but sometimes I like it too much. So I was like, wait a minute, monosodium glutamate, MSG, you know what I mean? It's like for about a third of the amount of sodium you're getting through that, you get almost all the flavor of sodium. So I started just kind of looking it up a little bit, and it actually naturally occurs in a lot of foods. A lot of cultures use it. What do you think about that?
I remember it had a bad rap way back in the day. Remember that?
Yeah, it
MSG.
did. It had a really bad rap. And that's why I'm kind of like, after just looking it up a little bit more recently, I'm like, I wonder if that was undeserved.
Yeah. And then you go to Germany and like a lot of the condiments have MSG in it.
It tastes good.
A lot of them do. Yeah, it tastes great. I have no issues with it at all. I'd be able to get the flavor without the excess sodium. But speaking of somebody who have excess sodium, I had one client that was just cramping all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. And I'm like, what are you cramping? It's off season. What are you cramping for? So you start playing detective. You go through everything. I'm like, dude, why are you adding so much salt? He was adding absurd amount of salt. I think it was like 12 grams. But I mean, he wasn't eating 5,000 calories. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he's adding potassium and he's adding electrolyte drinks. I'm like, dude, listen to me. And he's drinking so much water. And I'm like, this is what we're going to do. We're going to slowly bring all of these down. I'm not going to drop them all out. We're going to bring the 12 down to 8 grams of sodium. You stop supplementing with the potassium. You're supplementing with like 2,000 milligrams of potassium.
Well, can you even take a potassium supplement? They're like worthless, aren't they?
I don't know if they're worthless, but I know they don't come in high milligram anymore because people were messing themselves up by taking too much.
Okay.
So he was taking tons of like the 50 milligram tablets. So reduce the potassium, cut back your water from like, I think this water is like 6.5 liters down to like 4.5. And within 3 days, he's like, dude, the cramping's gone.
Huh.
I'm like, yeah, man, you were just creating an imbalance in your body. Like you were just hammering it with too much fluid, too much electrolytes, and your kidneys are probably having a lot of trouble trying to create that balance. And that's where you ran into it. And as soon as you lowered those, your kidneys kept up because your kidneys tries to keep that balance, you know, and if you're just flooding it with everything, your kidneys are like, oh my God, you know?
Well, there's drugs that actually modify that balance, like insulin. Doesn't that increase potassium?
That I believe can decrease potassium.
Does it decrease?
Because so I know, insulin can decrease potassium.
I thought it was.
I know it decreases magnesium. So for example, right? Like if you are eating a bunch of sugar and then you take a bunch of insulin, when insulin binds to sugar, I believe it takes potassium and magnesium with it. So there was an individual that had refeeding syndrome after a bodybuilding show. He ate a ton of sugar. He ate diazides. He ate a ton of sugar and drank a bunch of fluid. And then the next day, he couldn't stand up. He lost full function of his lower limbs. Went to the hospital, got blood labs. His potassium was super low, and his magnesium was almost not detectable in his blood.
Ew.
It was like bottom. And they're like, oh my God, like, how'd you get depleted so fast? Because it sucks it right out of the blood.
Golly. Well, this is why before you start dicking around with that stuff in bodybuilding prep, you might want to have a coach like you. You know, like someone like Chris Tuttle, kind of watch your back there to make sure you don't fuck something up because, you know, ion imbalance is something people don't think about.